A gleaming black Mercedes SUV? My heart sank as I watched my brother Keith step out of that luxury vehicle that had to cost more than my entire year's income from the bakery. The morning sun glinted off its pristine surface, momentarily blinding me. Just last week, he'd told me with such conviction that he was still too financially strapped to start repaying the money he'd borrowed from my retirement savings. Like my new ride? Keith ran his fingers lovingly along the car's immaculate hood, pride radiating from his face. Just picked it up yesterday. Got an incredible lease deal. You wouldn't believe the technology package it has. Voice commands, heated seats, the works. My name is Martha Wilson, and at 58, I stood frozen in the gravel driveway of my small cottage, watching my younger brother flaunt his expensive new car while the $45,000 I'd lent him from my nursing retirement fund sat unpaid. Money that was meant to expand my modest bakery business. Money I'd accumulated through decades of night shifts, holiday rotations, and careful saving during my 35 years as a nurse at County General. I thought you were facing financial difficulties, I said, struggling to control the tremor in my voice. My fingers gripped my coffee mug so tightly my knuckles turned white. Isn't that why you needed to borrow money in the first place? To prevent your development company from going under? Keith waved his hand dismissively in the air, his gold watch catching the light. I still am in a tight spot, Martha. This is completely different. It's just a lease, not a purchase. Besides, I need something impressive to drive clients around in. Image is everything in real estate development. I remembered vividly the evening he'd appeared at my cottage doorstep, his eyes red-rimmed, his usually confident demeanor shattered. How he'd nearly broken down explaining about the development deal gone wrong, about potentially losing his business reputation, about needing help just this once. I transferred the money that very night, depleting most of my retirement savings, because that's what family does. We support each other, especially after I'd promised Mom I'd look after him. Your previous car was barely 3 years old, I reminded him, the taste of betrayal bitter in my mouth. And you specifically promised to begin repayments after 6 months, Keith. You shook my hand on it. Don't be such a worrier, Martha. You're doing well enough with that little cake shop of yours. You've always been good with finances. He glanced around my modest cottage with thinly veiled condescension. It's not like you're desperate for cash right now anyway. He pulled out his sleek phone, checking his reflection in its glossy screen. Oh, did I mention I'm organizing an investment tour in California wine country this summer? You should join us, though it might be a bit beyond your budget. I stood there speechless, my coffee growing cold in my hands. The casual way he dismissed his debt to me, the implied suggestion that my financial responsibilities somehow meant I deserved less consideration. The sheer audacity of inviting me on an expensive trip while owing me thousands. All of it crashed over me like a wave of ice water. Actually, Keith, I do need that money, I said, my voice finding new strength. I'd planned to use it to expand the bakery into the old barn, remember? To create that teaching kitchen I've always dreamed about. Well, maybe this is a sign from the universe that you should keep things small and manageable at your age. He glanced at his expensive watch with exaggerated concern. Anyway, I can't stay and chat. I've got a meeting with potential investors. We should grab coffee sometime soon. As I watched him drive away in his brand new Mercedes, the engine purring like a contented cat, something inside me finally broke. A year of excuses, deflections, and shattered promises crystallized into perfect clarity. My brother wasn't just careless with money. He was deliberately taking advantage of me, and I had allowed it to happen, just like I'd allowed it my entire life. The pattern was painfully familiar. Growing up, Keith had always been the charismatic one, blessed with our father's persuasive charm and confident smile. When he maxed out his first credit card at 19, our parents had covered it without question. When he dropped out of college after 3 expensive semesters, they called it following his entrepreneurial spirit. Every financial misstep was met with unwavering support, understanding nods, and inevitably a check. I'd chosen a different path, working my way through nursing school, building my healthcare career from hospital aide to senior nurse, saving every extra penny. Our parents had called me the sensible one, but their tone always carried a hint of pity, as if my financial responsibility was somehow less impressive than Keith's string of exciting business ventures and spectacular failures. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose that had been dormant for too long. My nursing career had taught me the importance of meticulous documentation, and now those skills would serve a different kind of healing, my own financial recovery. I spread my papers across the kitchen table and began gathering evidence, every email, every text message, every bank transfer between Keith and me. My fingers trembled with both anger and determination as I documented it all. I created a detailed timeline of Keith's promises and subsequent excuses, printing everything in a neat binder. The pattern was almost laughable if it wasn't so painful. Desperate pleas for help followed by months of evasion, all peppered with casual mentions of his latest indulgences. I felt sick to my stomach seeing it all laid out chronologically. The manipulation was so obvious now. I can't believe I was so blind, I whispered to myself, the morning sun streaming through my cottage windows as I worked. I even found the paper napkin where he hastily scribbled his repayment plan. That day in my kitchen. 6 months tops. He'd written in his bold handwriting, complete with monthly payment amounts he'd never once attempted to make. I'd preserved it in a plastic sleeve, some part of me knowing it might matter someday. Now it sat in my growing file of broken promises, a testament to my brother's casual disregard for his word. My phone buzzed loudly against the wooden table. Another text from Keith. Hey sis. Some investors are planning a weekend golf retreat next month at that new resort. Great networking opportunity for your bakery. We could work out a payment plan for your share if money's tight. I stared at the message, my jaw literally dropping open. My hands started shaking so badly I had to set the phone down. He was inviting me to spend money on a luxury golf weekend while sitting on $45,000 of my retirement savings. The sheer audacity of it made my chest tighten with fury. I could almost feel my blood pressure rising, that familiar sensation I'd experienced during the most stressful moments of my nursing career. That afternoon, my dear friend Eleanor called. We'd been inseparable since nursing school, and she'd retired just last year from her successful law practice specializing in elder rights. I saw Keith's new car on Facebook, she said cautiously, her voice carrying that familiar legal precision. Isn't that the same brother who borrowed your retirement money for that guaranteed development project? The very same, I replied, fatigue evident in my voice. Martha. Eleanor's tone turned serious, the way it always did when she was about to deliver critical advice. You need to take action immediately. This isn't acceptable behavior, especially at our age when financial recovery time is limited. I spent 30 years watching seniors lose their security to family members. She was absolutely right, of course. I trusted family instead of protecting myself, a mistake I'd seen countless elderly patients make over my nursing career. But it wasn't too late to fix that error in judgment. You know exactly what's going to happen, Eleanor warned, her voice carrying the weight of professional experience. The entire community will say you're being cruel to family. They'll tell you to be understanding because business is tough, and he's had setbacks. He's been having convenient setbacks since Reagan was president, I said, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. Meanwhile, I'm the one living in this small cottage, postponing my bakery expansion because my savings are sitting in his driveway disguised as a Mercedes. After ending the call, I opened my laptop and started researching historic property designations and preservation laws. Eleanor had graciously offered to connect me with a colleague who specialized in historical property cases. I also found templates for formal cease and desist letters, the necessary first step before pursuing legal protection for the farm. My hands trembled as I typed Keith's name into the template. This would change everything. No more pretending at community gatherings that everything was fine. No more playing the understanding sister while watching Keith spend my money and plan to destroy our family legacy. No more being the reliable doormat everyone walked over. But as I looked around my small cottage at the life I'd put on hold, the faded sketches of my expanded bakery and teaching kitchen pinned to my bulletin board, The stack of my mother's recipe cards waiting to be shared. With a new generation, I felt my resolve harden like steel. Keith had made his priorities crystal clear when he bought that Mercedes instead of honoring his commitment. Now it was time for me to finally choose mine. I sent the legal letter by certified mail, carefully filing the receipt as another piece of evidence. For the first time in months, I slept soundly through the night. 5 days later, Keith stormed into my bakery after closing time, the bell above the door jangling violently as he flung it open. He was waving the legal letter in his hand like a weapon. His face was flushed with anger, designer tie askew, his usual polished demeanor completely unraveled. "Are you completely out of your mind with this legal nonsense?" he shouted across the empty cafe, startling me as I wiped down the display cases. "I'm your brother, Martha. Your own flesh and blood. You can't file for historical designation on property that's partly mine." I straightened up slowly, setting aside my cleaning cloth. My heart hammered in my chest, but years of handling medical emergencies had taught me to remain outwardly calm in a crisis. "You've had a full year to handle this like family, Keith," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. "Now we're addressing it like adults who made a binding agreement about our parents' legacy. I will not let you destroy our family farm for another one of your get-rich-quick schemes." "I can't believe you're being so sentimental about a bunch of old buildings," he shouted, pacing between the tables. "It's just land and some rotting barns. Progress is more important than preserving some ancient farm tools." He collapsed dramatically into one of my bakery chairs, already starting the wounded routine that had worked so effectively in the past. "Yes, our heritage is important," I agreed, feeling the weight of Mom and Dad's memory in the room with us. "So important that I gave you my retirement money when you needed help. So important that I trusted you with part of the farm when Mom asked me to on her deathbed. How's that working out for our family legacy? You know my business has faced challenges. Not enough challenges to prevent buying a new Mercedes." I cut it sharply, my patience finally exhausted. "Or those Italian loafers you're wearing. Or that California wine country investment tour you're organizing." Keith's performative distress vanished instantly, replaced by cold fury. His eyes narrowed as he stood up again, towering over me. "You're just jealous because I know how to build something meaningful, while you waste your time playing with cake recipes and living in the past." The accusation stung, but I held my ground. "No, I'm furious because you took advantage of my trust. Because you promised to honor our parents' memory and instead treat their life's work as nothing but a development opportunity. Because you see nothing wrong with driving a luxury car while the money you borrowed sits unpaid." "Fine." He stood up, straightening his expensive suit jacket with an angry tug. "Take this to the preservation board. See how the town council feels when I explain that your little stunt will cost them tax revenue and jobs. Everyone knows this town needs development, not another failing small business." His words hit me like physical blows, each one striking deeper than the last. I thought of the decades I'd spent caring for this community as a nurse, the relationships I'd built, the trust I'd earned. "I think you'll find this community values its history and the people who've served it," I said quietly, surprising myself with my own conviction. As Keith stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle my cake stands, my phone lit up with notifications. Keith had obviously started making calls immediately, rallying his business connections against me. "Mayor Wilson." "Martha, what's this I hear about blocking the Wilson farm development?" "Let's discuss this first." "Chamber President, this project could bring serious economic benefits. Reconsider your position." I took a deep breath, the scent of freshly baked pastry steadying me, and typed out a public post for the community forum. Keith borrowed $45,000 of my retirement savings a year ago, promising to preserve our family farm. Yesterday, I discovered his plans to demolish the historic buildings for commercial development. I'm taking steps to protect our town's heritage." The responses flooded in quickly. "Chamber President, the project would create needed jobs." "Mayor Wilson, perhaps we can find a compromise solution." "Keith, I can't believe you're making private family matters public. This is between us." I actually laughed out loud at that last one, the sound echoing in my empty bakery. Private family matters? Like the development plans he presented to investors? Like the Wilson Farm Resort brochures he'd been showing around town? Whether private or public, I replied firmly, our parents' farm deserves protection from exploitation. You have 30 days to respond to my letter with an alternative plan. After that, I'm filing for historical designation with the State Preservation Office. The town council meeting was nothing short of a battlefield. The old municipal building was packed to capacity, with people standing along the walls. The mayor had called this special session to discuss the Wilson Farm development situation openly as a community, but it was painfully obvious whose side he was on. He'd even arranged for Keith's development team to present first, as if colorful renderings and economic projections would somehow make me forget about my $45,000 and our family's heritage. I simply don't understand why you're being so obstructionist about this project, Martha, Mayor Thompson said, adjusting his tie nervously as tension filled the room. Keith's development would bring much needed. If you say jobs and tax revenue one more time, I'm walking out, I interrupted, feeling the eyes of the entire community on me. We've heard that same promise with every development for 15 years. Meanwhile, my brother is driving a luxury car that costs more than what he owes me. That's completely different. Keith jumped up from his seat in the front row. The Mercedes is a business necessity. My clients expect a certain image, and this development will transform this dying town. You know what actually transforms communities? I opened my binder of research and historic photographs, preserving their authentic character, honoring their history, not destroying irreplaceable landmarks for another chain hotel and strip mall. Destroying? Keith looked genuinely offended. I borrowed that portion of the farm. You agreed to the transfer. You received it with specific promises about preservation that you've completely abandoned. That's called breach of trust, I replied, my voice carrying through the packed chamber. Eleanor, sitting beside me, nodded encouragingly. We'd prepared extensively for this confrontation. Councilman Davis, who'd been quietly reviewing documents, finally spoke up. Perhaps we could find middle ground. The council could allocate some preservation funds. No, I stood up, facing the crowded room. This isn't about the community subsidizing another one of Keith's projects. This is about my brother facing the consequences of his actions and honoring our parents' legacy. But we need economic development, the Chamber of Commerce president insisted, from the audience. The Wilson family should be working together for the good of Mapleton. Really? My voice grew stronger with righteous indignation. Where was this community working together philosophy? When I requested a small business loan to expand my bakery last year, Keith sits on the loan committee, and you all rejected my application despite my perfect credit history. That was completely different. Keith scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically. Yes, it was different because it was my dream instead of yours. Everything's different when it involves me. Oh, Martha's small business is just a hobby. Martha doesn't need support like real businesses do. I mimicked the tone I'd heard so often at community meetings. That's not fair, Martha, Mayor Thompson protested weakly. Being a responsible small business owner shouldn't make you less deserving of. Exactly my point, I cut in. Being responsible shouldn't make me less deserving of consideration, of respect, of having my brother honor his commitments and our parents' wishes. The silence that filled the chamber was deafening. Several council members looked uncomfortable. The mayor studied his gavel, and Keith. Keith just looked furious, as if I were the one betraying the community. I'll be filing formal historical designation papers with the State Preservation Office next week, I announced, gathering my materials. You can either start taking our town's heritage seriously, or Keith can explain to state officials why he's determined to demolish buildings that qualify for the National Register of Historic Places. If you do this, Keith warned, his voice carrying an unmistakable threat, it will change everything in this town. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. The expensive suit, the power tie, the entitled attitude that our community had unfortunately reinforced for years. Everything already changed, I replied, feeling the weight and truth of my words. It changed the day you decided your development dreams were more important than our parents' legacy and your word to me. True to his word, Keith rallied his business connections against me. Local shop owners who depended on his development projects called to tell me I was being selfish. Real estate agents sent messages about progress over sentimentality. Even Reverend Matheson from our church weighed in, suggesting forgiveness might be the Christian path forward. I saved all their messages in my legal folder. Each one revealed how Keith had weaponized his influence against me, transforming my attempt to protect our heritage into an act of community betrayal. Only Eleanor stood firmly by my side, coming to the bakery daily with legal updates and words of encouragement from her former colleagues at the State Preservation Office. A week before the State Preservation Committee hearing, the town council made one last attempt at intervention. I received a formal invitation to a closed session, and when I arrived with Eleanor at my side, I found Keith there too, sitting at the conference table with his development team and their glossy presentation boards. We have a compromise proposal, Mayor Thompson announced, sliding a document across the table. The town will purchase a portion of the historic buildings for a small museum. Keith can develop the rest, and we'll establish a community fund to compensate you for your investment. You can withdraw your preservation application, and we can put this divisive situation behind us. That's very thoughtful, I replied, after carefully reviewing the proposal with Eleanor. But no, this isn't about finding another way to accommodate Keith's development plans. This is about preserving what our parents built and what they entrusted to us. I could lose the entire project. Keith burst out, his facade of professional calm cracking. The investors might pull out if there are any more delays. You should have considered that possibility before making promises about land you didn't intend to honor, I said firmly. It wasn't about the land. It was a business opportunity that evolved. That's not how ethical business works, Keith. You don't just evolve away from your commitments when something more profitable comes along. Councilwoman Edwards started wringing her hands. Please, Martha. This is dividing our entire community. No, Councilwoman. Keith's actions and broken promises divided this community. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen or that it doesn't matter. But he's your brother. Mayor Thompson tried again, his voice plaintive. Yes, he is. And as my brother, he should have respected me enough to keep his word. To not pursue luxury developments while owing me money. To not treat our family's legacy like a commodity to be exploited for profit. Keith stood up suddenly, gathering his expensive presentation materials. Fine. You want to destroy this town's economic future over some rotting barns? Go right ahead. But don't expect any support from the business community ever again. I watched him storm out with his development team trailing behind him, remembering all the times I'd witnessed the same performance. The dramatic exits, the veiled threats, the strategic offended dignity. They'd always worked before. The town would rush to appease Keith, to clear obstacles for Keith, to make exceptions for Keith. Not this time. I'll see you at the preservation hearing, I called after him. Then I turned to the remaining council members. And if you try to interfere with the state's independent assessment process, I'll file a formal ethics complaint with the county commissioner. The mayor's face drained of color. Councilwoman Edwards stopped mid-sob. For the first time, they looked at me not as the reliable, accommodating Martha they could always count on to step aside, but as someone capable of standing her ground for what was right. The morning of the state preservation hearing dawned clear and crisp. I arrived an hour early, dressed in my most professional outfit, a navy suit I hadn't worn since my retirement from nursing, and carrying my meticulously organized binder of historical documentation. Eleanor accompanied me for moral support, her decades of legal experience proving invaluable in preparing our presentation. Keith arrived fashionably late, of course. He strode in with his team of developers and a hired architectural historian, all in expensive suits. He barely glanced my way as he set up their glossy presentation boards. Several town council members had made the trip to the state capitol and sat awkwardly in the middle rows, clearly uncomfortable with taking sides publicly. The preservation board consisted of 5 distinguished-looking professionals, historians, architects, and preservation specialists who listened intently as I presented my evidence. Original farm records dating back to 1868, photographs documenting the property's evolution, testimony from historical society members, and architectural assessments of the building's unique construction. These buildings don't just represent my family's history, I explained, my voice growing stronger as I spoke. They tell the story of our entire region's agricultural development. The main barn's hand-hewn beams were cut from trees that no longer exist in our county. The springhouse sheltered wounded soldiers during the Civil War. When it was Keith's turn to speak, he deployed his usual tactics. He spoke passionately about economic progress. He emphasized community growth and job creation. He mentioned his 3 failed businesses as evidence of his perseverance. He explained how the development was vital for the town's future. The preservation board wasn't swayed. Mr. Wilson, the chairwoman addressed Keith directly, her silver hair gleaming under the lights. Are you suggesting that demolishing buildings that qualify for the National Register is the only way to create economic opportunity in your community? It's just a few old barns, Keith protested. And my plan includes a commemorative plaque. That's not what I asked. Are you aware that adaptive reuse of historic properties typically creates more local jobs than new construction? Well, that's debatable, but, and these investment solicitations you've been distributing. She held up a glossy brochure one of Keith's associates had submitted as evidence, promising unobstructed mountain views. Did you consider that would require clearing the historic apple orchard your grandparents planted? Keith shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The market demands certain amenities. Mr. Wilson, this board takes a very dim view of development proposals that demonstrate such blatant disregard for significant historical assets. Your sister has provided substantial evidence of both the property's historical importance and viable alternatives for limited development that would preserve the most significant structures. I watched Keith's face as the realization dawned that his usual persuasive tactics weren't working. The preservation board wasn't composed of local business associates or admirers. They couldn't be impressed by promises of economic windfalls or swayed by charming smiles. Furthermore, the chairwoman continued, our preliminary assessment confirms that the main farmhouse, barn complex, and springhouse are indeed eligible for National Register listing. This board recommends immediate action to designate these structures while allowing development of the non-historic parcels at the property's perimeter. Partial designation? Keith protested. That completely undermines the integrated resort concept. I'd have to redesign everything. Perhaps you should consider how to incorporate these irreplaceable historic assets into your plans, the chairwoman suggested pointedly. Many successful developments have found historical authenticity to be their most valuable marketing feature. In the hallway afterward, Keith confronted me, his face flushed with anger. Happy now? You've destroyed millions in potential revenue. You destroyed it, I replied calmly, though my heart was racing. You destroyed it when you decided another cookie-cutter development was more important than our family's legacy. The town officials hovered nearby, looking stunned. They'd never seen Keith face genuine opposition before. They'd never seen me stand up to the town's most influential businessman like this. We could help fund some compromises, Mayor Thompson started to offer. No thank you, I cut him off firmly. Keith created this situation with his choices. He can adapt his plans to work with the historical designation. As I walked out of the government building with Eleanor, I felt lighter than I had in years. The farm's preservation mattered deeply, yes, but this was about more than that. It was about standing up for what was right, about refusing to be bulldozed by my brother's ambitions, about finally breaking the community pattern of enabling Keith's self-serving projects. The aftermath of the preservation ruling rippled through our small town like a stone dropped in still water. Keith had to completely reimagine his development plans to work around the protected historic buildings. He posted dramatic updates on his business page about regulatory overreach and the price of progress in rural America, but tellingly disabled comments when locals started asking questions about the actual details of the preservation requirements. The town council struggled to adjust to the new dynamic. Mayor Thompson kept trying to play mediator, inviting both Keith and me to economic development meetings as if nothing had happened. When I declined most invitations, he switched to stopping by my bakery with updates about how challenging things were for Keith's business. He had to cancel his California investment tour, the mayor said one afternoon over coffee, and he's had to hire a heritage consultant for the revised plans. Don't you think that's consequence enough? That's not punishment, Mayor, I replied, sliding a fresh cinnamon roll onto his plate. That's responsible development, like everyone else has to do. But he's losing face with his investors, having to drive his old car again. You mean the perfectly good 3-year-old Audi he had before the Mercedes? How terrible for him, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. After the first 2 months, Keith had repaid about half of what he owed me, mostly because Eleanor had quietly filed lien paperwork against his properties. He made sure everyone in town knew about each payment, acting as though he was making charitable donations rather than returning borrowed money. Then came the Harvest Festival. Our town held it every autumn, and this year I decided to participate with a booth featuring my specialty apple pastries. I wasn't going to let Keith's resentment keep me from community traditions I'd always enjoyed. When I arrived to set up my table, the whispers started immediately. Some business owners kept their distance. Others approached to share their opinions about how I should have handled things within the family. But something unexpected happened too. Several young entrepreneurs sought me out for advice on starting their own businesses. Mrs. Patterson from the Historical Society quietly mentioned that my stand had given her the courage to oppose a cell tower plan near the old church. Even Councilman Davis, who'd initially criticized my preservation efforts, admitted that his department had started taking historical considerations more seriously. Sometimes we need someone to remind us of our values, he said, purchasing a half-dozen pastries. Took our town too long to learn that lesson. The real surprise came from Eleanor. She pulled me aside during a lull in customers, looking unusually solemn. I've been speaking with some community members, she said. We've been thinking about how this town has always prioritized certain kinds of businesses over others. How we've overlooked the contributions of people like you, who care for the community in different ways. Eleanor, please, let me finish. Watching you stand your ground, even when the entire business community was against you, it made many of us realize how we've enabled a certain kind of development at the expense of what makes our town special. She handed me an envelope. This isn't charity. This is different. The Historical Society and Preservation Alliance have established a grant program for businesses that maintain our town's character. You're our first recipient. It's not a fortune, but it should help with your teaching kitchen expansion. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a check for $25,000 and an official certificate naming my bakery as a heritage business of distinction. This wasn't just money, it was acknowledgement, recognition, respect from the community I'd served for decades. Thank you, I whispered, blinking back tears. This means everything to me. 8 months after the preservation ruling, Keith finally completed the revised development plans. He submitted them to the town council without a word to me, but posted a vague business update about innovative heritage integration and responsible growth. My regular customers who worked at the planning office told me he'd actually hired a renowned historical architect and was genuinely incorporating the farm's historic buildings into a more tasteful, limited development. The town still struggled with the changes in our community dynamic. Various organizations kept trying to orchestrate public reconciliation opportunities between Keith and me, unable to accept that sometimes relationships need distance to heal properly. But Eleanor had become my fierce advocate, shutting down their attempts to pressure me into making a public show of forgiveness for the town's comfort. The repaid money went straight into my business expansion fund, and with the Historical Society's grant, I finally had enough to renovate the old barn into the teaching kitchen I'd always dreamed of. The day we broke ground on the renovation, I stood in the early morning light, thinking about how dramatically everything had changed from just a year ago. I'd lost the comfortable relationship with my brother, the automatic support of some community members, the role of reliable peacekeeper. I'd played for decades, but I gained something infinitely more valuable: self-respect. The profound understanding that I could stand up for what matters, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it caused pain, even when the entire town expected me to step aside like always. Eleanor helped me plan the barn renovation, and on the day construction began, she presented me with a beautiful hand-carved wooden sign she'd commissioned from a local artisan. It read, "Wilson Family Farm Kitchen, preserving heritage through flavor since 2024. I hung it above the barn entrance, a permanent reminder of principles defended and legacy preserved. At my teaching kitchen's grand opening during the Fall Harvest Festival, I observed my transformed community relationships play out in real time. Keith didn't attend, but he'd sent a lavish professional flower arrangement with a simple card reading, "Congratulations on your expansion." No fake enthusiasm, no veiled criticism, just acknowledgement from a respectful distance. Eleanor arrived early to help arrange the displays of historical farming tools we'd incorporated into the decor. Many town officials attended, and Mayor Thompson looked genuinely impressed as he toured the renovated space. "This is exactly the kind of heritage tourism we should be promoting," he admitted, sampling one of my apple tarts. The town council members seemed almost relieved that Keith and I had found a way to coexist without forcing them to choose sides. Keith was proceeding with his scaled-back development on the farm's perimeter, while the historic core had become my thriving bakery and teaching kitchen. Eleanor brought her famous peach cobbler and a bottle of local apple wine. "To honoring the past," she said, raising her glass, "and to standing your ground for the future." Other community members who'd initially criticized my preservation efforts now asked about heritage business grants, some even admitting they wished they'd been more careful about maintaining their own historical properties. The teaching kitchen wasn't as expansive as the one I might have created a year ago, before Keith's broken promises had complicated everything. But it was mine, created through decades of hard work and protected by newfound determination. Each restored beam and carefully preserved feature represented not just my business investment, but my investment in our community's heritage. Later that evening, after the last guest had departed, I found a quiet moment to sit on the old farmhouse porch, listening to the crickets in the fields beyond. Just a year ago, I'd been the town's reliable caretaker, the one who would sacrifice anything to maintain harmony. Now I was something else, something stronger, more defined, more purposeful. Sometimes community ties have to be tested to grow stronger. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do is hold people accountable to their better selves. And sometimes protecting what you value most helps others rediscover what truly matters.